platform to interact, exchange, share their views with the across world. Wish you all the best. I also like to extend my big thanks to our CDS colleagues and staff members and students too, who have worked very hard to make this online event very successful. I would also like to thank our ICT team of CUG, especially Professor Manish sir and Jayas bhai, Mayur bhai, Rajesh bhai, and Srikant bhai, and hope all the participant and eminent speaker will will interact and provide so many new dimension issues and challenges going on across the world to fulfill the objectives of this workshop. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Dr. Naresh Kumar, for your wonderful vote of thanks. Now we will move to the next session. I once again welcome you all and thank you so much for your presence here. We'll move to the next session of our other invited speakers. We have a special guest lecture by Dr. Georgi Whmis, and we have guest of honors lecture by Professor Daniel Nojokes. May I now hand over session to the chair of this session, Professor Atanu Bhattacharya, sir, who is also Dean of Center for School of Languages and Literature at Central University of Gujarat. He is also professor in the Center for English Studies. Professor Atanu Bhattacharya's interest includes English language, cultural studies, and their interaction with pedagogy. He has also received many national and international fellowships. Over to you, Professor Atanu Bhattacharya, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Sujauddin, for this opportunity. I welcome and the oral session from exciting discussion, I hope, over the next 3 days. I would just introduce the speakers, and as I've been told, the session is organized like this. We will have Dr. Georgi Whmis speaking first for about 20 minutes, and then Professor Daniel Nojokes speaking for about 20 minutes. And then we'll have a 10-minute discussion till about 12:20, 12:25. First, I would just introduce the speakers and then hand over the session to the speakers. Dr. Georgi Whmis is a senior lecturer and co-director in the Center for Research on Migration, Refugees and Belonging at the University of East London. From 2013 to 16, she worked on the EU Borderscapes project, focusing on the Dover-Calais border and processes of everyday bordering in London. She researched and produced the film Everyday Borders, which is available on Vimeo online, which aimed to raise public awareness about how recent UK immigration legislation has been shifting the state border further into everyday life. She completed her DPhil in social anthropology at the University of Sussex. Before working in border research, her work focused on post-colonial East London and past and present links with Bangladesh. She is co-winner of the 2019 SAGE Sociology Prize for Innovation and Excellence. So I welcome Dr. Whmis during this for this session on behalf of the Center for Diaspora Studies and the Central University of Gujarat. Professor Daniel Nauhawks is the second speaker of the session, is the Director AI of the International Organization and UN Studies Specialization at Columbia University School of International and Public Affairs, where he also serves as lecturer in International and Public Affairs. He has previously taught at the New School. His research focuses on the effects of migration, refugees, and citizenship on social, economic, and political development, migrants and refugee rights, ethnic identity, and the genesis of diaspora and citizenship policies, including his book, Migration, Citizenship, and Development, Diasporic Membership Policies and Overseas Indians in the United States. Dr. Nauhawks regularly advises governments and international organizations on issues of migration, diaspora engagement, human rights, displacement, and development. He serves as chair of the Dr. Georgi Whmis, please.
Hello. Hi. Good morning, everybody. Thank you to everybody, especially to Dr. Sujardin for inviting us here today, and to all the speakers and all the attendees. Thank you to Professor Bhattacharya for your introduction. I'm just going to share my screen, so I hope that's going to work. Is that okay? Can somebody say whether they can see? I'm going to be talking about research that I've been doing for the okay. I'm getting a message through that there's bad network quality, so I'm just going to turn off my camera. And hope that might be working now. Okay, so I'm going to be talking about a research methodology that I've developed along with my colleague, Professor Neural Yuval Davis. It's come out of her work around situated intersectionality, and we applied it specifically to research that we've been doing on the study of everyday bordering at the University of East London. So we're starting from the position of looking at borders. It was working on the EU Borderscapes project, coming from the position that is very well spoken about by being internal borders, and specifically we're focusing on K, and we're also looking at the idea that borders act as firewalls. They're not visible to everyone, and they are experienced differently by differently situated people. Much of this comes out of our this book, Bordering, which recently came out. So if you're interested in looking into the results of our research, I'm going to be focusing on the methodology. Please do have a look at this. But our main argument is that borders and borderings have moved from the margins into the centre of social and political life. And in doing so, it's redefining contemporary notions of citizenship, identity, and belonging for all. So what we mean by that is it's not just the focus on it's not just focused on people who might be identifying with various diaspora, being hegemonic, as well as racial minorities in their everyday lives. And it's creating grey zones around the world. So what do we do? What do we mean by everyday bordering? Everyday bordering involves the construction of state borders through ideology, cultural mediation, discourses, political institutions, attitudes, and everyday forms of transnationalism. Processes of bordering differentiate between us and them. So it's always about who's in and who's out. And these deterritorialized borders have come to play a much more central role in everyday life. What's important here for us now, and our particular why the methodology that we've been working on is so important, is that borderings are situated and constituted in the specificity of different political negotiations and different life performances of these negotiations means that it's being contested by individuals and groupings, and also within the constructions of individual subjectivities. So borderings are therefore extremely complex. They shift, they're experienced differently by differently situated people. They're external, they're internal. So how do we study them? Which is situated in sectional methodology. So, studying bordering to social studies and the processes and cases of differentially situated individuals and actors. And we do this through this everyday situated intersectionality approach, which is an approach that builds on the work of Patricia Hill Collins, whose view was that we can only approach the truth if we encompass as many differently positioned views and situated gazes as possible. So, for example, there's the example of the mouse and the elephant, and a mouse looking at an elephant will have a very specific view of that elephant and won't be able to see the whole thing, the whole picture. People looking at borders, experiencing borders from their situated gazes, have very different views of that border and those processes of bordering. So we need to use the methodology which incorporates all of these different perspectives and all of these different views. So the methodology aims to do is to capture these in the context in which we were looking at it. We used narrative analyses to really capture the complexities of this in relation to the dominant cultural narratives and the overarching economic and political frameworks, to really grasp that multiplicity of experiences, how borders are changing in meaning, how they're constructed, their connections, and their interactions with other discourses and practices. So the context of our research on everyday bordering was the reorientation of immigration legislation in the UK, which had been changing since the 1990s, but shifted significantly in 2014 with the UK Immigration Act, which was followed by a even more extensive one in 2016. But the significant thing about this act is how it shifted into everyday life, creating what famously has developed as the hostile environment on the migrants. So anyway, sorry, I'm getting messages about the bad network quality, and I'm trying to do something about it, but it's not working. So the Immigration Act introduced civil penalties for employers who had been found to employ people who didn't have the right residency documents or the right to work. It gave landlords the obligation to check the immigration status of every adult tenant living in their properties, and it increased the focus on so-called sham marriages for purposes of migration, through extending the gap between when you have to go and give notice for the marriage and the marriage actually taking place, up to 70 days in order to carry out investigations into the lives of couples who are married. So this was the context of our research and how we focused on, and at Calais Dover, for example, this was particularly looking at how everyday bordering shifted into ordinary people's lives as they were obligated to take on border guarding roles, as employers, as landlords, as marriage registrars, and in other contexts, in education, in banks, and more. So we worked around the notion of a bordering scape in order to locate the sites of our study. So a bordering scape being the spatial zone in which these specific bordering processes are taking place. So what we needed to do was to find these examples of differently situated gazes in a whole range of these bordering scapes, focusing on these overlapping areas of marriage and employment, housing and education. So our methods were to identify the bordering scapes. So, for example, registry offices, churches, places where employment would be taking place, in the case of Calais refugee camps, and also airports, for example, and ferries. Having identified those, we tried to obtain the perspectives of differently situated people who were located in those bordering scapes. So, for example, it would be the border official. It could be somebody who was from a migrant background, somebody who was trying to cross the border, people from the hegemonic majorities for whom the borders might be completely invisible. Adults who might have carried out over 100 formal interviews. We carried out focus, continuous observations, and with that, sorry, I think somebody's got their microphone on. Thank you. And the contextual analysis, the continual analysis of policy documents along with this. So obviously we needed permissions to be working at some of the borders, for example, within the registry office. We didn't get any official access to places like detention centres or even within the offices in Calais. But we did manage to interview formally several border force officers and to attend some engagement, what they call engagement activities with others, and carried out some informal observations. So we had the perspectives of people who were trying to cross the border, who were having different experiences of crossing the border, and people who were working there as well, in order to really understand what was happening in these processes of everyday bordering and how it was affecting people's experiences of their own citizenship as well as others. So I haven't got very much time, but I'm just going to focus on a couple of examples to give some sort of perspective on the on how this methodology worked. So in terms of the marriage bordering scape, we interviewed religious ministers, civil marriage registrars, people who had experienced different types of marriage at this marriage border. As it was a time of the changing law, we analysed the way that the media was making a spectacle of sham marriages in both the TV and in press reports, and to have a look about how the sort of dialogue between all of these. And we spoke to people who had experienced the marriage border from various perspectives. So, for example, here, a man we interviewed with a transnational family from South Asia talked about in arranging a marriage, the whole family is subject to the suspicion of the Border Enforcement Agency, which leads to all kinds of levels of embarrassment and stress and huge difficulties in actually arranging the marriage. So here we're talking about somebody who is a British citizen, for whom most of the family are British citizens, but because they're organising a transnational marriage, their experience of that marriage border is extremely intrusive, because not only are they not able to set the date of the marriage, they are also subject to questioning and suspicion for what they were doing. We spoke to a church minister who was aghast because he felt that when somebody gets married, his role would be to congratulate them and to be thinking about the religious rites, but instead he'd been forced to question whether, because he had been put in the position of a border guard, so he was being forced to question the right of the couple that he was meant to be marrying. So these were some of the perspectives that we were able to put forward. Similarly, we're running out of time, so I'm not going to detail it, but in the employment bordering scape, we interviewed employers and employees of different types of businesses inside and outside the so-called ethnic enclave economy, border officials, and found out very much so that people, again, who are British citizens but who are from racialized minorities, were very, very much more aware of the actions of the border force in comparison to people from the hegemonic majorities. So we did a similar thing with the accommodation bordering scape. So I do now, but to conclude, we know that the law is a human creation and it's reflective of particular political and ideological contexts, but through using this methodology, we think that it enables us to understand better what was happening at the state border, whether they're the internal bordering processes or those that were happening at the territorial borders between states. And if we had only interviewed border guards, i.e. paid border guards, or only interviewed members of the public who'd been obligated to become border guards, such as the business owners or just the migrants, we wouldn't have been able to understand the whole picture. So it was, for us, it was a useful process, and I hope that some of the work that we've done might be encouraging to people who want to carry out similar types of research. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Whmis, very much for this very, very interesting session on bordering and intersection and methods to be employed to understand the new forms of migration processes happening. Thanks so much. Professor Daniel Nahawks will go on to his talk, and then we will have the discussion. Dr. Nahawks, please.
Okay, good morning, everyone. It's good to be with you. It's 2:30 in the morning in New York. I try to be as lively as I can. I probably will turn off my camera too, so to make it as easy as possible for you to follow my presentation. There we go. And it is a pleasure to be here. I thank the Central University of Gujarat and of course Sujadin very much for inviting me, for giving me a chance to share my ideas with you, and it's very good to see a lot of people I know. Binod Kadri I have seen also on video here, Robin Cohen of course, I've seen Udaya Rajan on the program, not sure he is right now online, and it's a privilege to come after Robin Cohen and Georgi Whmis, who've both delivered very, very good keynotes and remarks, and mine will be a little bit different. Dr. Whmis' remarks are very sophisticated because she has done this amazing research for her book, which is very coherent, and also Robin Cohen's talk was very coherent in terms of giving us an overview of the development of diaspora perspectives over the last 5 decades. What I'm attempting to do in the next 20 minutes is to give a run through like a look back of different things, different ideas on diaspora research and migration research. So when I brainstormed earlier with Sujadin about what this lecture should or could be doing, or my talk could be doing, is like to introduce early career researchers and then a little bit about different perspectives and different research questions that I think should be approached. And I will focus a lot on policies because I focus a lot on policies in my own work, but I have a couple of other questions in there too. So we've heard already about diaspora definitions, right? And I will not spend really much time on defining diaspora, just to highlight a few things that may be important if you do research on diaspora. And the first is, there is a tendency both in the scholarly community and in the writing and especially also in the policy community to overlook heterogeneity of diaspora actors communities, right? So the first thing what you should never do is to talk about diaspora. The diaspora remits, the diaspora invests, the diaspora doesn't do things, right? The diaspora is not an actor. And the diaspora is comprised of a multitude of different actors and communities that may act in unison or they may not. There are a lot of friction within diaspora, and I think everybody attempting to do research on diaspora needs to understand that there are a multiplicity of actors with different ideas. We often look at changes and behavior and the individual. Why is somebody remitting? What does it mean that somebody is remitting? What does it mean that somebody is active in a diaspora organization, lobbying politically, returning, etc.? But we also need to understand that these individual processes are tied to intra-group processes. So within the group, and the group can be a very small community of Gujarati immigrants in Tanzania. It can be a larger group of Indian Americans. And we need to understand how intergroup processes between different groups. And again, what the group is depends on your research objective, but between the Indian community and the larger Asian American community, for example, or the Indian community and mainstream American community or other communities, right? In the Black Lives Matter community that we have right now, how are different diaspora communities positioning themselves, how these processes shape identity, shape political stance, etc. And the fourth thing I'm mentioning is positionality and intersectionality. And we've heard from Dr. Whmis a lot about intersectionality and how does diaspora identity, diaspora stance intersect with gender, with age, with professional status, with socioeconomic status, with and colleagues focusing on positionality look at where are these people located? Are they in what countries are they? Not everybody, not every NRI, non-resident Indian, has the same ideas, right? Whether they are in the Netherlands, whether they are in Pakistan, whether they are in Thailand or in the US, will have very important impacts on how they position themselves. But not just the country, also at the subnational level, whether they are in a rural area, whether they are in an area that is in the capital, may influence the networks they have, how politically active they are, etc. So looking at more than just bland statements of migrant origin. For example, I want to exemplify the interdisciplinary work one can do and the different differences with a paper I published about 10 years ago now on diaspora identification. I found a lot of people were talking about identity in the diaspora. And if you actually dive in the social psychology, identity theory, literature on identification, I think identification is often a preferred term to identity. But then I found that often people would identify with their people in their country of origin or subgroups, right? That I call it a national diasporic identification. But sometimes, for example, Indian people in Fiji or people of Indian descent in Fiji, they would say, I am Indian, but they don't mean they actually identify with people in India. It is just an ethnic identification with other co-ethnic, other Fijian Indians, Indian Fijians. Right, and another one is because I study a lot of membership statuses and citizenship statuses. So civic identification, how individual is connected to her home state or her home government. How does she identify as a citizen of India, for example, is something that may be different from the other identifications. I will now focus a little bit on diaspora policies because that is something that I focus in my own research on. And just a little run through what diaspora policies may entail. Often they aim at capacity building. They establish a relationship of communication. They establish institutions such as ministries, units, and offices that deal with diaspora affairs. They often support cultural practices, or they entail membership policies, dual citizenship, diaspora membership statuses, such as OCI. Everybody here studying the Indian diaspora is probably aware of the Overseas Citizenship of India, and I'm the proud author of the only, as far as I know, only full-length book on OCI, whatever that means. And here, of course, communication, right? Diaspora policies often entail communication. On the top left corner, we see former Prime Minister Manmohan Singh at the Prabhasi Bharatiya Divas that was mentioned earlier by the Vice Chancellor of the university. And on the bottom right, we see current Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who is addressing 20,000 non-resident Indians and myself in 2014 at the Madison Square Garden venue in New York. And often, communication with the diaspora is one of the key objectives of these engagements. This is a graph by Alan Gamblin, and I think Robin Cohen, who we heard earlier today, was actually involved in this project, which was run out of the Oxford Diasporas program, which is run by Professor Cohen, shows that over the last 40 years, diaspora institutions, meaning ministries, interdepartmental committees, shared ministries on diaspora affairs have grown a lot. But in spite of this knowledge, and it is amazing that Dr. Gamlin has put together this database, we actually don't know a lot about the different institutions, and we don't know how they matter, and if they matter, why, and what the conditions diaspora institutions matter. So those of you interested in institutional aspects of diaspora may want to look more into these questions. I was investigator for the last 5 years by the World Bank, the OECD, and UNDP. And there, for example, we measured intragovernmental mechanisms on migration, among many other indicators, in an attempt to measure policy coherence on migration and development. And here, for example, we measure interagency bodies that look at migration, not just diaspora, but also migration in countries of origin and countries of destination, running to 2 axes, including how often they actually meet and what kind of ministries and agencies are involved in these bodies. So this is still a very crude methodology, but we need to understand more if there are interagency, intergovernmental or intragovernmental departments working on diaspora or immigration or other mobility related concerns. We need to understand what they actually do, how they promote, how they influence policy making, for the better or the worse. Often diaspora options try to induce contributions, and that I think Professor Cohen talked about the second last phase of diaspora engagement, where a lot of also the last phase, 2010, where applied policy was looking at including diaspora, soliciting contributions, having general campaigns and appeals for diaspora, and disseminate information, having policy incentives, training diaspora actors. And of course, there's matching programs, assisting diaspora actors to actually find projects, and the Ministry of Overseas and Indian Affairs, which has been incorporated 3 years ago into the Ministry of External Affairs again in India, but had several of these partnerships, especially with CII, the Confederation of Indian Industries, to actually have these business-to-business facilitations between diasporas and resident enterprises. We also may want to understand why diaspora policies are adopted, and that leads us to questions of determinants of diaspora policy. And in an early paper of mine, I looked at Indian diaspora policy, and I found that there are 4 policy domains: economic policy, foreign policy, cultural policy, and home affairs, that actually influence diaspora policy making. And each of those is affected by internal and external factors. I just run through those for giving you ideas how to approach policy analysis with regard to diaspora policies. For example, internal factors, the openness of the economy, the suitability for economic cooperation, learning how to use diaspora assets are important for economic policy. External factors, of course, are how the diaspora is positioned economically, professionally. Are they actually viewed as an asset? Foreign policy depends on whether the countries of interest are where the diaspora is, what kind of foreign policy India had. For example, when during the non-alignment movement, India wasn't very keen on using the diaspora as a strategic asset. But also here again, the acceptance of lobbying in country of destination, the socioeconomic and political positioning of the diaspora may be important. The interest to promote one's own culture abroad, or whether migrants actually are in the position to lobby for one's culture, may be determinants for the cultural policy component. And lastly, home affairs. Often there are general attitudes towards foreigners which view even diaspora actors as something that is more suspicious, and whether the diaspora actually is a threat for national security. A few years ago, I developed a policy plant model where we look often at policy petals. And like a plant, the policy petals, which are the different domains, the home affairs, all the ones that I discussed in the previous slide, are the ones that are the most shiny, the easiest one to recognize, the easiest ones to actually analyze. But often to understand why a policy has been adopted or not, or how it was adopted in a certain way, we need to understand also other areas that are harder to understand. For example, contributions, party contributions. In India, we know that there were many political contributions to parties, financial contributions, but because of the Foreign Regulation and Contributions Act, they were not legal. Right, so there's no data about what kind of funds parties received from abroad, even though everybody knows kind of that this was the case. So to actually find out how much contributions shaped policies in India or elsewhere, you would need to engage in journalism to actually uncover some of these facts. And sometimes, and again, I can go more in the Q&A into these details, but policymakers, the interactions they have with family, friends abroad, the way they approach, why they interact with diaspora actors, be it in India, be it when they are abroad, actually had a huge impact in India on the adoption of policy measures. But this is often not something that is very clear. If you do interviews, it's not very clear when you analyze policy documents. And for all of these, we need to understand how global and regional processes, such as global fora, the Global Forum on Migration and Development, where diaspora policy are discussed in other fora, influence the national sphere. One thing that I find always very interesting is that for policies to have impact, they must be at a scale. They can't be too small. But many diaspora migration policies actually have a very low intensity. They're very low numbers, very low budget. If you look at it, like India has one of the largest portfolios of diaspora policies. But I would say about 90% of these policies, be it the No India program for young diasporas and others, are extremely low scaled. And so the question is always, well, often one gets the feeling that the announcement and the media dissemination, especially around the Pravasi Bharatiya Divas, the diaspora conference, is actually the main objective of a diaspora policy. So the question is often then, what is the actual objective, the claimed objective, the actual objective? And I think it is often essential to stop judging policies by their intention. Looking at the Tres por Uno, the 3-for-1 policy from Mexico, which is the most quoted and most cited policy vis-a-vis encouraging collective remittances. There are actually no real rigorous critical assessments of development impacts of these programs. And I think it's really important to do these. From a normative viewpoint, we need to understand that diaspora policies can be problematic. So often they have an ethno-nationalist basis. Often who the diaspora is very much involved in certain ideologies. For example, there have been tendencies in the Indian policymaking sphere to focus more on the Hindu diaspora, whereas Christian and Muslim diasporas have been often outside. And of course, there have been some tendencies or some historical developments where more Hindutva-based diaspora engagement has been promoted. Again, I'm not saying all diaspora policies are in that realm, but when it has to criticize or has to critically scrutinize those things. The policies may actually fuel long-distance nationalism, and while so as a German, nationalism is an inherently bad thing for me, and that's I appreciate that. Though I understand that nationalism can be a good thing in different circumstances, but we need to understand when and how diaspora policy actually engage in these long-distance nationalism. Often we have this incoherence where you have a very generous diaspora policy, but you bash the immigrant, right? And from a normative perspective, that is very problematic. Often diaspora policies try to create one diaspora, and that again is connected to the questions of heterogeneity and nation building, where people say we are one India, right? Where we then say, well, India is a very heterogeneous country, and the idea of creating this one Indian identity is intrinsically problematic. Sometimes countries create advantages for diaspora actors that are not available for other local actors, and that again may be problematic from a normative perspective. The political participation of non-residents is sometimes a good thing, sometimes it's a required thing for getting their contributions. But if you're not actually resident in a country, a lot of philosophers have argued that it is problematic if you are included in political processes. And of course, who is courted? Are these just the elites or other groups? So again, looking at not just the diaspora as a homogeneous group, but sometimes it's just these these more elite groups that are courted, and that can be problematic. A very short slide on migration more generally, where we often focus on immigration policies as who is allowed to enter, who, or immigration policies who leaves. But actually, human mobility is connected to all those different areas, and we sometimes have to understand how diaspora issues, immigration issues, emigration issues, displacement, refugee issues are connected to education, social development, employment, etc. We call the integration or mainstreaming of mobility into policy areas. My last few slides are about adopting a transnational lens and about interdisciplinary research. Often the research we find is focused too much on one country. But if you actually look at these transnational phenomena, it's really important to incorporate a transnational diaspora lens.
Dr. Nahawks, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I cannot see your slides. So I don't know whether it's a problem with me or is it...
No, it's everybody. Nobody has seen the slides.
Oh, all right.
That is, I have the most beautiful slides, and that is a...
We missed all of them.
We missed the slides because I think you were referring to the slides at the end of this thing, and I suddenly realized that I can't see the slides.
Oh, really?
But your talk without the slides was most intelligible.
No.
Yes, we can see it now. But yeah, we could follow what you were saying, but we couldn't see the slides.
Can you see it now?
Yeah,
Yes.
we can see it now. Yes.
That is the most stupid thing. I don't know what the. I must say I'm teaching on Zoom all the time. This is the first time I'm doing this on. But I said at the beginning. Okay. Anyway, that is very unfortunate. So very unfortunate, because that would have helped you a lot in understanding what I'm actually saying. So and I was referring to photos and everything. And
do a quick run, Daniel. Do a quick run. We will capture.
No, कोई बात नहीं. इतना time नहीं है मेरे पास. So let me the beautiful slides so you can see what you have planned actually. Okay. So now the last few slides, which is a pity, but on transnationality and transnational research. So, for example, how returnees of transnational companies make use of transnational networks can be included in in the relevant explanatory variables, or where this is not the case. We can look how continuous transnational activities shape the domestic economic performance of diaspora firms, and I do a lot of research on diaspora investment. Questions on the quality and the extent of transnational activities should be built into the analysis of all forms of diaspora engagement, right? So that's one thing I would urge, especially our upcoming researchers to focus on. And beyond the bilateral focus on country of destination or country of origin, we may want to understand how activities in diaspora or other networks in a variety of countries actually influence the potential and the impact of diasporic engagement. So if you look at of India and the US, it's not just important how, for not all questions, it's important how Indian Americans actually or Indians in the US engage with India. Sometimes they may involve Guyanese Indians, or they may involve networks of Indians elsewhere, or they may leverage non-diasporic networks in England or elsewhere. So having a more global way of transnational research is, for some questions, important. One thing that I've seen too little in many of much of the research is that we really need to scrutinize and understand data. And a lot of people quote data on diaspora, on migrants, on remittances without actually understanding what the basis of this data is. right? Remittances. Everybody thinks it's clear what remittances is. And I could give you a 1-hour talk about differences in remittance data. Every country has different remittance data. Nobody knows exactly what it is. A lot of things are not and remittances studies use different data than the global remittance data that the World Bank is issuing. So we need to understand what a migrant is from a statistical point of view, from different how diaspora actors are defined in sociological research, in statistics, etc. So my plea to everybody who's doing research: understand these concepts and see what we can and we can't learn from them. My last slides, and again slides now, are just highlighting the multi, inter, and transdisciplinary foci on diaspora and migration. So political scientists, for example, may look at state institutions, governance, institutional coherence, the participation of immigrants or immigrants in policy processes, or the cooperation among states on migration, or the discourses related to diaspora. Economists often look at the economic rationales and impacts of migration for individuals, for communities, or including on remittances, diaspora investments, or the impacts of immigration and emigration. Anthropologists often look at the everyday construction of relationships and processes. Sociologists often look at the effects of policies on individuals' agency, ethnic identification. Demographers and population characteristics, determinants, modeling, and estimation of future trends. Social psychologists are important for ethnic identification. Legal scholars look at detailed regulations and the impacts of laws. Political philosophers on normative and ethical aspects, responsibility limitations of state and community behavior. Political policy and administration scholars look at practicalities of feasibility, institutional constraints, impact assessments of policy and planning instruments. And then we have humanities, cultural scholars, historians, geographers, social work scholars, and data scientists who, for example, look at big data on Facebook, Twitter data, and others. The reason why I'm just enumerating these is for many of us, it is important to integrate some of these perspectives. And what I'm telling my students and what I'm trying to do in my own work is to embrace the complexity of the questions. We often shy away from answering a question in a more holistic way because we feel we don't have the tools and the training to do it. But I think, for example, I have a PhD in political science. I have a master's degree in economics. I have a full degree in law, but I'm not any of these disciplines. I'm a migration researcher, right? So I try to integrate a lot of these disciplines, for better or worse. And I think that is really important for the future of migration research. Thanks for bearing with me and through the technical challenges of the talk. And I look forward to your questions. I'm done.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nahox. And sorry, I just kind of realized much later that the slides were not visible. But thank you so much for a very, very interesting talk on policy implications and diaspora. And of course, it also nicely ties up with the talk by Dr. Whmis, which also was on intersectionality. And you too finished on the idea of bringing in the complexity and complex perspectives on diaspora research. So I open the session for discussions. We have around 10 minutes. Shujauddin, do we have 10 minutes around, or do we?
Yes, sir.
Around 10 minutes. So we could have raise of hands, and then we could take the questions based on the raise of hands. Or if you have to make a comment or a query or anything. So please name the speaker and then address the question to the speaker.
Mishra.
Yes, Eva, please go on. Yes, Eva, please go on. Yes. Eva, you will have to unmute yourself, I think. Unmute yourself, I think. We can't hear you. We can't hear you. We can't hear you. Sorry, Eva, we'll take your question a bit later. Can we move on to Dr. Naresh Kumar? Can we move on to Dr. Naresh Kumar? I think he has a question.
Hello. Hello. Can you hear me, sir? Can you hear me, sir? Hello.
Yes, we can hear you, Naresh.
Thank you, Professor Daniel, for giving very interesting presentation. So there is some echo problem, I think. Can you hear my voice properly, sir? Hello. Yeah. Sir, you have interesting presentation in your talk. So, nature of query is that actually there is a contradiction of the data collection in terms of remittancy or diaspora data, particularly this immigrant or immigrants, because we don't have a uniform definition to identify the migrant. As per the UN recommendation in 1998, some of the countries are following the UN recommendation criteria to identify the migrant, but it's much more decided by the national boundaries to look their own perspectives on demarcation to identify the migrants. That is also one of the challenges because we cannot make it is very difficult to make uniform policies in respect to consider all the migrants. So, what kind of possible policy recommendation possible to avoid such kind of problem to make a similar kind of data collection in terms of immigrant or emigrants? Thank you, sir.
Do we collect or do we answer right away?
I think we can ask Eva if she is ready with the question. Right now we have just three, and then we can take all the questions together. Eva, can you hear us? Yes, please go on, Eva, please. I'm sorry, Eva. We still can't hear you. I don't know what the problem is. We still not hear you. Okay, we have another question. We have Veeral's question. Sort out Eva's audio problem maybe later. Veeral, please.
I think Virali has one question, sir.
Virali, are you there? Can you ask the question, please? I'm sorry, I think we have lost. Dr. Nahox, if you could respond to the question, and then we can probably work out the technicality.
Did you say I should respond?
Yes, please, if you could.
Okay. For some reason, there's a lot of echo. Dr. Kumarji, thanks for the question. And for data, I mean, the first question is always, why do we need data, right? What is the question we're trying to address with data? And from there, we have to understand the different sources of data. So I worked at the UN Population Division, which is the only entity in the world that actually collects all the migration data, the migrant stock data that is kind of based on census data from that national offices actually send to the UN. That's our normal discussions on migrant data. That is the data we're talking about, and this is a highly problematic data, right? Looking at immigration in India, for example, all the actual immigrants are not covered because India has a formal policy not include immigrants. So I lived for 6 years in Delhi, and during the census, and they came to our house and said, "Sorry, you're white. We don't count you." I said, "Yeah, my wife is Indian." She said, "No. One foreigner enough. We don't count you." So, whereas everybody who is born in Pakistan pre-petition is counted as an immigrant in India. Of course, a number that's going down, but still. So one thing one needs is to understand the data, right? There is no, and of course, this is stock data, which means it's the entire number of people who are migrants, which for if you give a talk and you want to say how many migrants in the world are there, that's an interesting fact. You can have a little graph, whatever. But for anything a little bit more sophisticated, it's not really important, right? For any academic analysis, these kind of broad numbers are kind of, again, they are used, like you can to illustrate something, but not really interesting for doing analysis. So my plea is just, nobody has good data. What we would like to have is very detailed data. Some countries, as you know, don't have good data. Like censuses in some countries, in the US, census is okay. In many other countries, the census is not a good, a very reliable source of data. You would like to have some microdata, but again, the definitions for each of these microdata sets, if you look at the demographic and health surveys, DHS surveys, which you have in many countries, in developing countries, where now migration is included in many of those, but they often use different variables, different definitions. Again, for remittances, the World Bank definition for remittances, which is based on the IMF, which is not the same in every country, and a lot of things may become as remittances that are not actual intra-family transfers as we think of remittances, as somebody sending a migrant to their family. So my plea is just for everybody doing research, we need to understand what this data is and what it isn't, and then if we can actually draw conclusions or what the limitations of conclusions are.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you.
Thanks. We have not been able to hear Lorraine, Eva. So I'm just reading out the question. This is again to Daniel. And her question is... Yes,
sir, this is Shiva. Can I ask one question, sir?
Shiva, I'm just asking Eva's question and we'll take your question after that. Is that okay? Yeah?
Yeah.
This is again to Daniel. What motivates the Indian diaspora in the US to participate in the Indian assembly elections at such a large scale, especially when many of them are not even Indian citizens anymore? So is there an answer to that? Shiva, we can take your question now. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Daniel, sir, for such an excellent lecture. Sir, my question is, when you talk about the foreign policy of a country towards its diaspora, then how the policy should be framed in such a way to address the diversities? Let us say, when you talk about the Indian diaspora, we see so much of diversity in terms of its historical formation, in terms of its phases. So how to bind, let us say, in a policy framework, the Indian diaspora in the Caribbean, which is, let us say, very ancient in nature, and the Indian diaspora in USA, which is a very postmodern in nature, and in terms of its economy, culture, and political participation, they are quite diversified. And again, within this Indian diasporic group in USA or in Caribbean, we find many diversities. So, how to address those diversities in a foreign policy making in the diaspora? Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Yes, Shuja.
Should I go? Should I answer, or are we collecting more? Well, I guess I'm answering that. Thanks for these questions. I mean, I can tell you right now, I will not be able to do justice to these questions because they would require a longer response, but I'll try to be as succinct as I can to give you a few ideas. First, when you say what motivates the Indian diaspora, and that the first asterisk I would like put, as I said earlier, the Indian diaspora is not active, right? Because the Indian diaspora is not an actor. It's many, and I know it's a shorthand for meaning different actors in the Indian diaspora or in the community. But I just wanted to highlight a point that I made earlier, that we should refrain from thinking about the diaspora as somebody who is doing something. So the Indian, many parts of the Indian community here in the United States have displayed a lot of interest in Indian politics. And by the way, earlier the Vice Chancellor mentioned that they greet Modi everywhere, and Modi is greeted in many parts, but there's a lot of opposition to Mr. Modi in many vast parts of the diaspora. People here in New York, from most of the people that I know are not there to greet him, but have placards with other content when they go to these rallies. So that again, there have been many political differences, but overall the involvement of the Indian diaspora and many different diaspora communities in the US, in India, is very strong. We actually don't, I mean, what promotes them? I mean, a lot of Indians here, as the second person who answered, sorry, Mr. Dr. Mohanty said, it's a much more recent diaspora, so they have, of course, much closer ties in terms, they have family ties in the United States, in India. And often they are more professional. They often have the resources to engage in political activities. They often pride themselves in being politically active. Again, the self-identity of somebody who is professional is often different from somebody who is who's barely surviving in the Gulf and elsewhere. So I think that these are the reasons why they are often more politically active, even with the changes in the representation of people's.
Hello. Can I?
Hello.
This is Vinod Khadria. Can I say something?
Yes, please go on.
Well, I'll try. I hope that this is audible. We also had the other speaker, Dr. Georgi Whmis, on the concept of everyday borders. I think there are many commonalities. I see that there are common issues between what Georgi and Daniel has presented in terms of the so many classifications, so many components. And then that is where I think it's almost like a matrix that we come across in terms of, if we put it in her words, it is everyday borders. But if we want to see it in Daniel's kind of classification, then it is a multitude of barriers, I would say. And many of these everyday borders are not the product of COVID-19. I think they have been there for quite some time. Maybe they were latent, but now they have surfaced more strongly. If you look at societies, or from the lens of anthropologists and others that Daniel was speaking about, then we see that many of these barriers have been there. Even when you try to cross these borders across caste or across races, and the classifications, the categories that we come across within the diaspora or across the diaspora.
Can I add to it? Hello?
Yes, please go on, please.
Yeah.
Dr. Madhulika, yes, please.
Yeah. To add to Dr. Vinod, I have a small question to the first speaker. It's not easy to work with with refugees and with the displaced population. You have worked. You have chosen to the methods like narrative interviews, informal and formal interviews. My question is, what are the challenges your team and yourself have faced when you have done this kind of study?
So the challenges were many. Thank you very much for your question, Dr. Ritchie. The challenges were many, to do with access, as you indicate when you're talking about the fact that much of the focus could have been on refugees. So, for example, when we were interviewing refugees, we didn't do many interviews with people who were presently in the Calais refugee camps. What we did was interview people who had been in the camps and who had successfully crossed the border into the UK and had some sort of status within the UK. So this is why the narrative interview was particularly interesting, because we were able to kind of delve into their experiences of borders right back to, if they were in Afghanistan or other places that they may have come from. So there were many ethical issues, obviously, in this. In approaching the border force people, that was, as I indicated, tremendously hard, because we also wanted to ensure that we didn't just get one perspective of the border force, as Daniel's just been talking about. We don't talk about the diaspora in some sort of rarefied way. The people who work for the border force are also situated differently. They join the organisation for different reasons and had different perspectives. So we needed to make sure that we accommodated a variety of those as well, and didn't just come up with some sort of homogenized view of how those people are working at the border. So yes, to go back to Professor Vinod's point, there's many similarities in the approaches that Daniel and I have taken. I'm originally an anthropologist. I was working with Neera Yuval Davis, who's a sociologist. We kind of brought my ethnographic, sort of deep, grounded ethnographic approach together with her sociological, theoretical approach. And in this case, I think it worked well together. The interdisciplinarity was very, very important in order to accommodate the kinds of complexities that all of us have been talking about. Thank you.
What I meant was by everyday borders, when Daniel mentioned about nationalism, the good nationalism and the bad nationalism, and that's where I think the everyday borders could be created if we are in the domain of bad nationalism. That's like, the kind of incidents that you come across, the hate, the lynching, and that takes place, or the Black Lives Matters, which was the what preceded that are all part of this. That I like my country, but I have to prove by hating your country. That I think is the dilemma, and that creates the everyday border that we come across. I mean, that's what my observation is.
Can I just respond briefly?
Yes, please.
Yes, please.
Yes. Okay. I mean, our focus was very much on everyday state borders, but so rather than the kind of boundaries or borders that exist in other ways, but are of course related. But taking a historical view, a lot of my other work has been on Indian seafarers who worked on British ships during the days of the East India Company and beyond. And very, very similar processes were in place because of the navigation and maritime legislation, which ensured that ship owners, for example, were responsible for controlling the settlement or non-settlement of Indian seafarers back in the 19th century and right up to the relatively recent days. So those kind of public-private partnerships between the state and private companies which are existing in current everyday state bordering, has a genealogy going right back to those days as well.
Thank you, Dr. Whmis.
Hello.
I'm sorry, but I think we'll have to close this session. We are getting ready for the next one. But thank you so much. And there are quite a few questions that are still being taken on. So I'm sure that we're going to gather these questions along and take them along and probably share them with the speakers. I would like to personally thank the speakers on behalf of the Center and the Central University, Dr. Whmis and Dr. Nauhops. It has been a fascinating talk and interlinked equally because both of you, as Dr. Capri pointed out, were heading in more or less similar directions. So thank you, both of you, and we close the session with this. Thanks very much.
If I may just say that the chat box is limited to the team members only. The chat box is not open to the participants to write anything.
We are trying to look into the matter, sir. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Professor Ratnu Bhattacharya, sir, to Dr. Georgi Whmis and Professor Daniel Nojo for this enlightening session. I must thank you for accepting our invitation and giving your insightful thoughts to our participants. And regarding this chat box, we have conveyed to our technical team. They are working on it, sir, and it will be available soon. Now we will move to our last session of today. That is the second session on contemporary methodologies, methodological issues in migration and diaspora research. The session is being chaired by Dr. Shailendra Kumar and Dr. Sayantan Mandal. Over to you, chairs.
Thank you, Dr. Hello, am I audible?
Yes, please, go ahead.
Hello, thank you, Sujat. Now we welcome all of you to the second session, which is contemporary methodological issues in migration and diaspora research. And I welcome my co-chair, Dr. Sayantan Mandal, and the speakers of the session, Professor S. Irudhyarajan and Dr. Amit Kumar Mishra. So first of all, I would like to introduce the speakers. Professor Irudhyarajan is professor at the Center for Development Studies, Kerala. He is chair of NOMAD thematic group in internal migration and urbanization managed by the World Bank. And for the past 3 decades, he has been working with CDS and he has coordinated 8 major migration surveys in Kerala since 1998 with Jakaria and others. And he has also conducted surveys in Goa, Punjab, Tamil Nadu, and also in Gujarat migration surveys. And he has published extensively in national and international journals on social, economic, demographic, psychological, and political implications on
migration, and he's also the editor of the annual series of India Migration Report, and he's editor-in-chief of the journal Migration and Development. And he works closely with the Ministry of External Affairs, Government of India, and the Department of Non-Resident Keralite Affairs, Government of Kerala. And the second speaker is Dr. Amit Kumar Mishra, who is Associate Professor in School of Global Affairs, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar University, Delhi. His areas of research interests include the Indian labor diaspora, causes and consequences of labor mobility, histories of labor intermediation, culinary cultures, and gustatory negotiations of diasporic Indians, and reading transnational migration from perspectives of state society. And Dr. Mishra has received numerous awards and fellowships. First Chancellor's Award for Excellence in Teaching and Research, 2013. He is a Fellow Royal Asiatic Society of Great Britain and Ireland, 2017 onwards. And he is also the recipient of fellowship for tech research in London in 2004, and he is member of International Advisory Board Global Gurmit Institute, Suva, Fiji, and Canberra, Australia. And now, without taking much time, I will invite Professor Irudhi Rajan for his talk. Yeah, Professor Rajan.
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me, all of you? Professor Katriya, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes, we can.
You look very tired now, hearing all the speeches. So I don't know, I can talk more time because we are already reaching 12:48 in my computer. And I'm supposed to wind up by 1:10. Then I thought we'll go for question for up to maybe 10-15 minutes. So I thought of winding up by 1:30. That was my plan because I had some meeting with somebody at 1:30. So I will have another 45 minutes. So what I will do, I think you had many things, but I will speak something on the researching international migration. And I'm also thankful to the organizer, Dr. Sajuddin, for inviting me for the international workshop on research methods and approaches on migration and diaspora studies. Now, I just want to start with a question because we are all doing research on international migration. Who is international migrant in the context when we are discussing the COVID-19? Is it somebody holding Indian passport, working anywhere in the world, or somebody who went to study in UK or New York? So I think this is something we should always discuss. There is a confusion between migrants and diasporas. If anyone is going to Gulf, if you are looking at the migration cycle, somebody leaves from Kerala to Gulf, probably he will come back as a returned migrant. Somebody goes from Gujarat to Canada, I don't think he's going to come back. He will become an Indian citizen, what is called the Indo-Canadian. So I think we are still not clear exactly whom we are talking about. So I thought I will limit what is called the migrants, or we call them immigrants who are still holding Indian passport, living in anywhere in the world. I think this is what I'm going to discuss some ideas for people to think. Now, already you heard about the numbers. I don't think we have any numbers. Even the numbers given by the MEA, all not even number. It's all, I call them estimates, not even estimates. Because estimates are at least something you can talk about, like the government of India gives estimates for the next year's GDP. They talk about estimates, but this is only estimates. So whatever you have, including international organization, whatever who gives UN or World Bank, I don't think they're all underestimating the international migration from India. All are underestimating. Now, look at the example. Today, we talk about 30 million people in 200 plus countries. But if you talk about migrants still holding Indian passport, probably we are talking about something like 200 lakhs or 20 million Indians. This number is higher than World Bank numbers, UN number, anybody number is something about 17 to 18 million, but I would put close to 20 million. Now, out of this 20 million, when you talk about migrants, 10 millions are in the anywhere in the world outside the Gulf. So 10 million people are in the Gulf, or 100 lakhs people are in the Gulf. In 6 countries, UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, Oman, Kuwait, and Saudi Arabia. These 6 countries accommodate 10 million Indians. We have seen now about the Vande Bharat flights. People want to, there are many flights came from the Gulf to India than from New York or from London or from even from China. We talk about student migration. So I think there are many flights came from Gulf. It indicates that we have more people in the Gulf. Now, when we talk about NRI, I always make a joke. Probably some of you heard my lectures earlier. For me, NRI means not required Indians. That's why we don't collect data about them. Today we know how many chappals are exported from India. We will have by day. How many chappals exported? What is the size of the chappal? Or what is the car exported? It is Maruti 800, Maruti Wagoner. Everything you have data by day-wise, month-wise, week-wise. But we don't have any data on people. That means I don't know. We are worse than the cars and chappals. I don't know. So we are talking about what is called the not required Indians. I think we never talk about them. Diaspora, we have some interest not because of politics, because of the money they give fund elections in India. Diaspora fund elections. I know that every political party in India collect money from them. Left, right, everyone. But the migrants send remittances. So many people, international migration means remittances, nothing beyond that. But please remember, the remittances are sent by migrants. Migrants mean money, migrants mean remittances, because diaspora is not going to send remittances. Why should they send remittances? Because they are already buying a house in London. In fact, I was seeing so much money is going from Kerala to America and UK because they are selling their house of their grandparents and taking the money back to buy a house in London and UK and other places. That means money is going back. There is no remittances. It's like a reverse remittances. The money is going back. So we are seeing that what is called the remittances, migrants will send. Diaspora will take the money from here. Of course, they will come back on philanthropy. They will come back on election funding. They will play politics. But the migrants are not playing politics. The migrants are not basically, it's nobody's child. We have seen in the COVID-19. Nobody talked about them. Nobody talked about them. Lockdown 1.0, no talk. Lockdown 2.0, no talk. Only lockdown 3.0, 4.0, there was some talk to bring them by one-day forward flight. And for that, they have to pay for it. They have to be quarantined. They have to, we know that how the migrants are treated. Somewhat, that how the Indian embassy handled them in the countries of origin. So the migrants are not in anybody's thing. And even the 20 lakh crore announced by the government of India, by the Prime Minister, not even single word about migrant welfare, international migrants. Of course, internal migrants, they are telling we'll give you 5 kg rice and go back. That's it. Even internal migrants. International migrants, nothing is not even a word mentioned in the 5-day speech by finance minister. And they were sent last year $84 billion. So this is what the migration statistics, this is what the migration we are talking about. I think so. No data on migrants. What we have in this country, we have divided the Indians into 2 categories: ECR passports and ECNR passport. ECR passport data we have through the e-migrate system. Anybody going to 18 countries, you have some data. ECR passport means, I also make again, exploitation compulsorily recommended passport. Exploitation compulsorily recommended. You have to recommend them. They will exploit them by the agent, by the embassy there, by the customs, by the what is called the flights. Everywhere they are exploited. That's why it's called exploitation compulsorily recommended passport. I think they are going to cancel it, probably, hopefully, with the immigration bill. Otherwise, this is the only data we have. That means what we are talking about, tip of the iceberg. Last year, they sent 8 lakh people from the India. We are talking about 20 million. So I think, please remember, we have ECR data cannot give you anything on migration. Then what is other data you can talk about? You can talk about some surveys, NSSO or IHDS. These are all surveys because the migrants, if you want to estimate migrants, some of you who are familiar with the demographic estimate like fertility, mortality, migration, if you want to estimate international migration, you need a larger sample. That means you need a larger money. And there is, who wants money? Who wants to invest money on migration research? And people like Professor Kataria knows, where is the money for doing migration research? You want to do a big survey with 3 crore, 5 crore, not available. And I remember that is where we started doing our own survey. Started in 1998, called what is called the Kerala Migration Survey. With 15,000 households, we are providing what is called the migrants by destinations, by qualifications, remittances by districts. So we are giving lot of data on that because that is the survey-based method and which is the largest sample size. That is, it is higher than 3-4 times higher than what is called the NSSO sample in Kerala. So this is the survey we have done, and that is where we were promoting migration surveys, and we have replicated. Some of you can read the Kerala Migration Survey, which is available in the CDS website. You can download the articles, you can download the questionnaire, you can download the sample frame, you can download how we estimate the migration. We have written a book on that called Researching International Migration. You can download the book. So you will get the methodology of how to do a large-scale survey in country like Sri Lanka. They can do a survey. Small country, they can do a good migration survey to estimate at least one time period, what is called the stock of migrants. Today in Kerala, we are talking about 25 lakhs migrants are in the Gulf. That is a stock. We don't know the flow, but we also know return migrants. We have 15 lakhs return migrants in Kerala. This is based on our survey. We have 6 MLAs in the Kerala Assembly. But return migrants are everywhere. They are in UP, they are in Rajasthan, they are in Bihar. Nobody talking about them because there is no data about them. And nobody talk about return migration. We know that many people who return back to India because of the COVID-19. We know that they are waiting. And already the Gulf countries have announced amnesty. But we are all, they are all given what is called a very, not even a full service. And we had a Ministry of Overseas Indian Affairs. Now we have clubbed with the MEA. So it is they are sometimes they are wanted, sometimes they are not wanted. I think that is something we should look at it. So migration research is not such remittances. We should go beyond that. And please remember, if you take the example of Kerala, where we have done the several rounds of migration survey, one migrant is supporting 4 people in Kerala. So we are talking about 2.5 million Keralites are in the Gulf. We are talking about they are supporting 12.5 million people in Kerala. That means 1/3 of the Kerala population is directly benefited by migration. Can we do this type of analysis for any states? 1/3 of the Kerala economy is managed by remittances. And the remittances to Kerala is equivalent to 36% of the Kerala state income. For India, it is 84 billion. But how much comes to Bihar? No data. How much comes to Uttar Pradesh? We have no data. So we are all talking about one number and then we are playing with that. And then the remittances also, it leads to lot of development. These migrants are not fighting wars between India and Pakistan or India and China. But they are fighting the war against poverty, against unemployment, against nutrition. They are all fighting. They are all heroes for their families. That's why when you go to Philippines, welcome, return back heroes. They are coming back, they are heroes. They because of that one person income, the whole family is moved from poverty, upper side. The children are going to study in good schools. Sustainable development goals. Can you imagine sustainable development goals without understanding migration remittances? No. So I think this is something we should go beyond researching international migration on the different facets of its implication on human development, on education, on health, on girl children, on housing, on amenities. We were talking, if you walk from Kerala, one district from Trivandrum to Kasaragod, if you see a big house, it has to be either belong to the migrants or belong to the corrupted man in Kerala. Either a corrupted man holding a big house or an immigrant. But the immigrant money is a blood money. He is working in 50 degree in Gulf. Whereas the other monies, we know it is a black money. Black money. So I think this is something we should keep in mind. And before I open up for some issues, I also want to talk about what is called when you doing research on international migration. Don't only work on economic aspects of migration. I think we have some research going on economic impacts on migration, but I think we should do some research on social cost of migration. I think that is very, very important. Very few research has been done. There are many people, they never move, they are affected by migration. They never move. They never go to Gulf. They have not seen the Gulf. But something happens in the Gulf, they are affected in Kerala. So I think this is something we should do more research on international migration. These people, we call them social cost of migration, includes 3 groups of people. One is women, one is children, and one is elderly people. These are the 3 groups of people affected by somebody's migration. Now, There is no data on that. How many people are affected by the social caste? And in Kerala, we have done a survey which indicate in Kerala, we have 1 million women whose husbands are not here. 1 million women, married women. So can you imagine them? They are belong to different category. Young women, just married, having just a child, somebody is expecting a baby, somebody's child is studying 10th standard. So you can imagine how the women are managing the household, managing the mother-in-law, big issue, we know that. Managing the money sent by the husband. So managing the household and the 1 million women we are talking about and what they go through their life. But when we did the study, we asked them, everything is good because they have good house, but they are missing somebody. How long? Sometimes that fellow comes after 10 years, every 2 years he will come. I was talking with a couple recently. They completed 25 years of married life. They are what is called the Gulf families. And then I asked them, the husband was telling me, sir, we were married for 25 years, but I was with my wife only 14 months in the 25 years. Every 3 years I come for 2 months. 8 times I came, 24 years are over. We should study about the implications of that. We should study about the sacrifice made by the wives here, sacrifice made by the husband there. Transnational families. Husband is in the Gulf, wife is in Kerala, son is studying. The whole family is transnational. It has lots of social implications. We should study that. Very, very important. A new research has to highlight on the people who never moves. When you study migration, they are not there. We never talk about them. They don't want to come by Vande Bharat flights. But they are demanding, sitting in Kerala, please allow charter flights. My husband can pay. Please bring him. I want him to die in Kerala, not to die in Dubai by COVID. So I think this is something we should look at. This is a one group of people. We never do research on them. We should do that. The second group of people, which is very, very important, is children. I have seen in Kerala, we have 20 lakhs children are living with only father because the mother has gone as a nurse to some countries in the Gulf to make some money to buy a house. And then somebody living only with mother, somebody living with only grandparents. Both parents went to make money. And some are in the boarding schools. 20 lakh children are growing their adulthood without the parental guidance. I was talking to one of the young boy. In the school, their parents are abroad. I called the boy who was studying 8th standard. I asked him, when did you see your father last? He said, I see him in the Skype now. Then I asked him, can you compare your father to me? He said, my father for me is an ATM machine. So father has been now converted into a money man. Anytime I want money, I send a message, he sends me money. So for my father, for me, is an ATM machine. Then I asked him what he will do. Sir, he has given me, every month he sent me 10,000 rupees and he put me in the boarding school. So what I will do when I grow 25, 30, my father will be old. I will put him in the old age home. I will send him 20,000 rupees. It is called what is called the exchange of money. That's why Kerala has 550 old age homes. Because when you are growing, you are not there. Now you are the old age home. And he said, there will be inflation. So I have to double the money. He talks about, the boy talks about inflation. You can imagine we are creating that this is what the family is. Children are, you put me in the boarding school, I'll give you like, teeth for teeth. And children are growing. And they said, I'm studying here. I'm in the English medium school because of my father, but I hate him. I have not seen him. I have a biggest phone in the school, but I don't see him. I think this is not just boys. This is girls. I think we are creating a new type of society where recently in Kerala, one young boy killed his father, killed his mother, killed his sister. Psychological stress. They've never met. Every family wants to be like their family because the father was in Africa, mother was in the Gulf, son was studying in London, daughter was studying in Australia. They meet once in a while. And then the boy had some mental issues and he killed all of them one day in a big house, the biggest house in the heart of the city. Mental health issues of children growing without the parental guidance, without grandparents, without children, sometimes with friends. They may have a lot of money, but then money is not the end of the story. I think we should tell the migrants about that. Then we have, again, 40 lakhs Malayalis, old people in Kerala. They are living here when their children are abroad. There is an association in Kerala, children in America, parents in Kerala. Children in America, parents in Kerala. Children in Philadelphia, parents in Kerala. Children in London, parents in Kerala. There is a big association coming up because children are not there. Children are not there. And the elderly are living alone. Alone. And then this is something we should look at it very, very carefully. Migration means not such money, not such remittances. It goes beyond that. And look at the elderly. When we did a study on social cost of migration among the elderly, we went to a house, a 80 plus year old lady. We were talking with her. Are you alone? She said, I am alone. Then who stays with you in the night? He says, of course, God is with me. But God cannot make you morning breakfast. You have to make your own breakfast. Nobody is there. And then who is living with you? And she was telling almost in a crying voice, Sir, I had 5 children, 3 sons and 2 daughters. My husband passed away. My son, one son is in Italy. I don't know, he is still alive. I don't know because of the COVID. I don't know. One son is in Italy. One son is in America. One son is in Canada. All are doing well. And I have 2 daughters, both of them living with their husbands in the Gulf. I am alone. So to remember my children, I have now 3 dogs in my house. 3 dogs. What are their names? First son name is Matthew, so one dog name is Matthew. Second son name is John, second dog name is John. Third son name is Gabriel, so third son dog name is Gabriel. Because he remembers the sons, he has to look at the dogs. And then I said, what did you do with your daughter? I have 2 cats, Maria and Martha. So people are living with dogs and cats in the old age. They are supposed to live with children and grandchildren. It is created by the migration. And she was telling me, sir, even I die, I will be in the mobile mortuary for at least 4 days. Mobile mortuary in Kerala. Mobile mortuary means it's migration. If you go to any place in Kerala, somebody died. We ask them, why you are not burying today? Oh, his son has to come from Canada. Oh, his daughter has to come from America. Now, of course, they are not able to come also because of the COVID. So I think we should talk about not just money and migration. We should talk about the social cost of migration. I'm going to stop here because I think we have another 10-15 minutes. We can chat some questions and related issues. I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Hello. Thank you, sir, for the lecture where you have talked about the social cost of migration, and which moves us away from the remittances and the economic impact of the migration and looks beyond at the social side of the migration. Now we'll invite 2 questions before we move to the second lecture. Yeah, any questions?
Yeah, sir wanted to receive questions first, then he'll leave. He has to attend some other meeting.
So that's what I said. I mean, we can have few questions and then we'll move to the next presentation. Yes.
Everybody's hungry?
So anyone who has a question can raise their hand and unmute their mic and ask the question. Please go ahead.
think Mr. Prabhat has some question. You can ask Prabhat sir.
Yes, Prabhat, you can unmute and ask the question.
Hello.
Yes, go ahead.
Sir, I'm Jayalakshmi. I would like to know about diasporic conflicts, especially generational gap.
Answer the question. Diasporic concept.
Prabhat sir, are you? Yeah. Do you have any question? If there is no question, may I request Sayantan Mondal to give vote of thanks to sir. Then we will go for next session. Next speaker. Yeah. Can you unmute yourself? You are not audible, sir. Yeah, speak now. Yeah. Sir, your voice is not audible. Sayantan, sir. You have to unmute, please.
Please unmute yourself, Sayantan.
Yeah.
Hello, am I audible now? Can I ask a question? Hello.
Prabhat, go ahead with the question.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Yudhya Rajan sir, for his nice lecture. I have a question that when we talk about international migration, we have several parameters to judge the to quantify the actually international migration, such as the remittances or immigration department's data. But what about the internal migration? When we saw during this pandemic that several issues emerged with the this COVID-19 impact after lockdown. So what are the resources or what are the parameters so that we can quantify or somehow we can locate the internal migration? Thank you, sir. Yeah.
It's not a part of this my talk, but anyway, I think you have asked the question related to internal migration. So, definitely, we also as I told you, not required Indians. Internal migrants have shown that they are also not required in this country because no state want to take responsibility for them, either the states of origin or the states of destinations. For example, when the government of India announced lockdown 1.0, they should have allowed that train to go and drop these migrants. They wanted to go in the lockdown 1.0. We did not do that because we don't know how many are there, in which state, which district, which corridors. We have no idea. That's why when the corona infections was only 500 in India in March 25, we never allowed the migrants to go. When it is now 4 lakhs, and India is now the rank 4th, and it will go maybe 3 and 2 very soon. And now we are sending our migrants back to what is called the Corona Express, not the Sarmic Express. So we are sending them. Now the Corona is going everywhere, from Chennai to throughout the country, Delhi. So I think that is indicate basically we have failed to recognize the contribution of internal migrants in the development. We have not recognized in their policy. That's why this happened. Because nobody never ever thought that the migration is so big, they will come out in the road and they have to die in the, to reach home by walk, in the railway tracks. We have seen them, but we have not seen them like that in the international migration because they are dying in other countries. For example, 200 Malayalis have died because of COVID in the Gulf countries, but only 22 Malayalis died in Kerala. That's why everybody wants to come to Kerala so that they can at least die here rather than dying in Dubai. Because COVID, somebody dies of COVID, they are not even able to bury the body. Lots of issues are coming up, but they are not here. International migration, you have not seen them, how the suffering are there. For example, in Kerala itself, they were supporting when Kerala had floods in 2018. They were sending money. And today, they are begging for their food in Dubai, Qatar, Bahrain, Oman. What can we do? What we can do in the embassy, what they can do. And all the associations in the Gulf country, they are helping them to give food, medicine. Many people went to see their parents. Somebody went to see their husband. Some children went to see their, father, mother. So they are all stuck there. But we have not seen that much international migrants because they are all in the other media. We are seeing in internal migrants because you see them in the streets in every corner of this country.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, thank you for your answers.
Thank you, sir, for the. Am I audible? Hello.
Yes,
so,
please. Yes, sir.
Yes. Actually, Sayantan sir's voice is not there, so I'll formally thank Professor Irudirajan on behalf of Center for Diaspora Studies, Central University of Gujarat, for giving us a very thought-provoking and enlightening lecture on the issues of migration and especially the NRIs and looking beyond the economic side of it, which is just the remittances. And he gave us various examples of the social impact of migration on the women, children, and elderly who are left behind, or who are directly or indirectly affected by this whole international migration process. So it was a very nice lecture and thought-provoking. And I would like to thank you, sir, on behalf of the center. And we are very thankful for the lecture. And now moving towards the next lecture, I would like to invite Dr. Amit Kumar Mishra. Hello. Is sir there? Amit sir?
Yeah, I'm there. Yeah, thank you.
Yes. Okay. So you can start with your presentation. Yes.
Okay. Just the in the webinars, the usual protocol is that to start with asking everyone that am I audible? So am I audible to all of you? Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay. Good to hear. Good to know that. Thank you, Shazauddin and Central University of Gujarat. Hello. There's a lot of echo coming in, so I others would be muted. Yes, thank you, Shazauddin. I'm very glad to see you again. And also as a teacher, it's very satisfying to see someone growing, someone doing so well, whom you have seen as a student in the university. While I was at Hyderabad, I was also part of your doctoral committee, so I know I've followed your trajectory for a long time. And congratulations, Sudha, for this wonderful workshop, putting it together. And thank you for inviting me to be part of this this amazing collective. I also see I was not directly his student, but many of us got inspired by seeing his work and his engagement with the issues. One of the pioneers of doing transnational migration, Professor Khadria. Good afternoon, sir. Let me switch on my video also, if that helps, if that's better. Good afternoon, colleagues. Good afternoon, participants. Good afternoon, collaborators from abroad. I'm delighted to be here. I'll share a few things. And I think Professor Rajan has left, but he will not take it otherwise as a senior colleague and as a teacher. So before I start, let me put a few things in perspective. With an apology to Professor Rajan, I sincerely hope he will not take it otherwise. We all have been grown up reading his work. Professor Rajan gave a very passionate speech, a very passionate lecture, very enlightening lecture as well, to talk about the migrants, to talk about the Gulf returnees and their plight, their unfortunate condition, how they've been ignored in the policy making, the larger narratives of the state, the larger schema of the state, but with a caveat that I'm not trying to deconstruct or deny his thing, but I just a humble submission to that, or rather don't look at it as a deconstruct or alternative, but a kind of an addition to the arguments put forward by Professor Rajan, is that many a times the differences between the migration and diaspora are more nuanced. They are not so clear that those who don't have passports of another country are migrants, and those who acquire the passport of the other country they become diaspora. The differences are far more nuanced. I and most of the researchers, and because also it's a research methodology workshop, is rather if we look at migration more as a process which has more technicalities, which actually results in formation of certain or most of the diasporas in that way. So you cannot really, in my humble opinion, you cannot really separate the two. In such a contrasting manner. The second is, that and again a caveat that don't don't read my argument as a favor or as someone who is enamored by the diaspora in United States and Canada, what we call the dollar diaspora. But then, we also cannot dismiss them so much by the ones who do politics, negate their a lot of other things which we do. I'm very critical to them. I have written a very long paper which came in a conference, and after that in a journal called Roundtable, in which I'm very critical about their approach to the homeland and their involvement with the homeland. But then we cannot dismiss the fact that the $80 billion which we talk about, almost half of it comes from there. There is no denial of the fact that a lot of $80 billion come from Gulf, but we also cannot deny the fact that about half of it comes from those who we try to dismiss as doing politics. Having said that, and again, in a very humble, submissive manner, let me move to some of the things which I'm trying to put forth. I'm looking at largely it as a methodological challenge that, diaspora studies have come a long way. Diasporic communities have a long history. If you start reading about diasporas, then, most of the scholars say that, it's diaspora as a process, as an outcome, as a community is as old as antiquity. People have been moving from ages, from the recorded history, from the times we can actually record, from the time we can actually trace. But then, somewhere in the more recent times, because of the conditions of more recent globalization, or what we call the late globalization, diasporic communities have become a very important, community. Something which we all want to engage with, something we all want to, to trace, to critically study. Particularly with the large nations, also what Arjuna Padura uses a concept called the post-national cartography. So when we are looking at the globalization, the post-national cartography of the contemporary globalization, then in this post-national cartography, diasporas are very important contour. They are the ones who are re-articulating a lot of territorialization. They are the ones who are renegotiating borders. They are the ones who are renegotiating the understandings of belonging, the nation state itself. So in this entire, kind of reimagining, renegotiating, rearticulating of a lot of critical issues of the global order, diaspora becomes a very important community, also a tool, also a very important, contour. And that is where it becomes more and more important and pertinent for the national government, for the scholars like Professor Kadria, for students like there are a lot of students here to rethink, to hold on, and to do a stock taking how we have studied the diasporic communities so far, and then what are the issues which have remained unresolved? What are the issues which, again, a lot of time has passed, a lot of water has flown through the rivers. So what are the issues which we have looked at in certain way, but which need to be looked in another way, which needs to revisit, what we call the revision, what we call the course correction. So in that sense, that is where I'm trying to bring some of those issues, bring some of those concerns, which make us keep think. Again, a caveat that please don't look at and as we go along. So what we do in our research is that we do a review of literature. We engage ourselves with the existing work which has been done. That does. Hello.
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay, there was somehow I got disconnected from the meeting. Sir, can you see me? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes. So what I was trying to put forth is that, so when we engage with the review of literature, or when we do a stock taking kind of thing of the existing work which has been done, it doesn't imply that we are trying to dismiss that. All what we do is that we appreciate that, and we try to move beyond. We try to find certain gaps without being dismissive. So that is where, we need to rethink, we need to talk about, we need to, to revisit again and again. It's not, and today, say you are doing a workshop on methodology, a lot of us will make arguments, but that doesn't also bring a finality. What I'm arguing today, or what Professor Kadria is arguing today, or what Professor Rajan just argued, that's nowhere the final methodology. That nowhere brings the conclusive element into the research. Research means that you go on, you keep evolving, you keep engaging and re-engaging. So in that backdrop, then, what we do, so one thing which we, the way I'll try to move in this. Hello. Yeah, Shuza, I was saying that, can you check with your technical team, because it says that you are being removed. So I don't know. Let me continue. Sorry.
Now it's fine, sir.
These interruptions. So what I was trying to argue here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So yes. To look at diaspora studies, studying diasporic communities rather, and try to find how we engage with them. Some of the things which I will try to do here is to find the two things. One is how we study particular gaps, how we try to address, and then also the second is that can we find new sources? Can we incorporate or look for new?
Rajesh bhai, can you check what is the problem? Rajesh bhai, can you listen me? There is some problem with Amit sir's video.
Sir, actually the problem is Amit sir's side, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Not our side, sir.
Okay, sir. I'll tell him.
Maybe Amit can switch off his video and try only to speak.
Maybe some network problem would be there, sir.
So just a request him to switch off the video and only allow the audio to come out. As
Yes, I'm back. I'm very sorry about this.
Amit, I will suggest you switch off your video. Just speak.
Okay. Let me try this, sir. I hope it helps. I sincerely hope it helps. So I'm audible now. You cannot see me, but you can hear me.
Yes.
Okay, great. So two things which I was saying. I'm sorry because of this disruption. I have to go back, and also it breaks my thought process. But theek hai, we are still third word, so it's all right. So two things. One, some methodological gaps, and second, some of the sources, because methodologies are very critically dependent upon what kind of sources do we use. Can we find a new source? Because we may bring very ambitious objectives. We may put forth a very ambitious research project, but then, and we also try to evolve or argue for a very innovative methodology. But unless and until we have sources, unless and until our methodology is backed and based on solid sources and alternative sources, then it doesn't make much sense. The outcome will not be so drastically different. So the sources, so in that sense. But before going further, on that, I would like to talk about that where actually some way I was talking about a little earlier in this conversation, is that that what we have to do is that, and why diaspora becomes so important, and that is from where I will take it to the gaps, is that diaspora has been kind of trying to there's a large body of radical progressive literature on that, starting from Paul Gilroy, Black Atlantic, to many more in the context of Indian diaspora. Maybe we can talk about David Davidine, the Coolie Odyssey, the Negritude, and then parallel to that, the Coolitude, those kind of things. The diasporas have been often put as something which is alternative to the nation's absolutism, the nation for the native, but then where is the space for the diaspora? And then and where is the space for the diaspora in this new global order? So that is where the diasporas are being looked at as the challenges to the nation state. Not in the real term. Nation as a political category remains there, but a lot of beyond political kind of things of nation. So diaspora tries to challenge that kind of an absolutism of the nation state, which is very singular, which talks about authentic, which talks about one race, which talks about one citizenship. And in that, then what happens is that the diaspora brings a challenge. So what we have to look at when we are trying to look at these larger questions of contemporary globalization, then we need to look at not only the formation of the diaspora, not only the migration, the process part of the diaspora, that how people moved, but then also we have to look at the lived experiences of the diasporic people. How they negotiate, how they articulate themselves, how do they identify themselves when they meet the other. Amartya Sen has an amazing anecdote in his book called Identity and Violence, that he was headmaster of the Trinity College, but when he was crossing the immigration checkpoint at the Heathrow airport, the immigration officer asked him the question that Mr. Sen is the master of Trinity College, is such a good friend that can you use his address as your address? So in that imagination, in that understanding of that white person sitting at the immigration checkpoint, a brown person, a diaspora, could not become the master of the Trinity College. So how does the diaspora react to it? How does the diaspora respond to this? So that is where it becomes very important. Also one, and again, I say that please don't feel that I'm a great subscriber of postcolonialism and a lot of postmodern jargon. But, somewhere where Derrida talks about the difference, how the difference between the native and the diaspora, the white and the brown and the black, English, Hindi, chicken tikka masala, and your fish and chips and your burger, how the differences are. The differences are there. But in the context of the diasporic negotiations, and which we have to be very cautious as well as conscious about, is the what Derrida calls the systematic play of this difference. And that is where in his work he puts an A instead of E, DIFFERANCE, difference. So how do we unpack and critically engage with this kind of a project where the differences are being systematically played? Differences exist, but also differences are being played around, So that is where so we need to look at. But then, there is so diaspora has gained a lot of currency. There is a lot of work on diaspora. If you look at India, we are so much engaged with diaspora now from migration perspective, which Professor Rajan argued just now, to very strong cultural studies perspective also. A lot of, diasporic literature comes from the South Asian, diasporic histories. Every university now, there are so many universities in India which have dedicated departments and programs to study diaspora. The one I was working in Hyderabad just a couple of years back, to the department which is hosting this interesting and amazing workshop. Diaspora studies has gained a lot of currency. But then once, what happens is that once this goes along, once it moves ahead, once it progresses, then what happens is that we sit and we start looking at that, how's it going so far? As I was saying, that we try to revisit, we try to do some stock taking. So once we are doing the stock taking, and it's not me, but a scholarship globally, so we are doing this stock taking, then, there are certain apprehensions which emerge out of. Once we start reading the works on diaspora, then there are certain apprehensions which come out. And one of the biggest apprehensions which comes out of this stock taking of diaspora studies so far is the theorization, and universality. If you look at most of the theories, hello, yeah.
Yes, sir, you're audible.
Yes, great. So if we look at most of the works, I'm not denying, and I'm myself a student of history. So so when I do a lot of my work, there is a lot of history, there is a lot of archives in my work. But if you look at the large work, I'm trying about the more general, the bigger, trends, the more dominant trends. What we see is that there is a kind of excessive emphasis on theorization. That's also because of the age we are living in, certain kind of post-coloniality, which is very heavy on theory, coming out of postmodernism, and actually coming out of the dissatisfaction with the modernist perspective, which are in history, what we study as the positivism. Too much of fact, too much of, of the data. So as a kind of departure from that, we got into the postmodernist perspective, which is then what happens is in certain way, and again, I'm not dismissing that. Postmodernism has made very significant theoretical contributions. I just mentioned one, Derrida, and how significant his use of the word and concept difference has become in contemporary context. But then, somehow it tends to be more heavy. There's no problem. It's all right. It's good to be heavy in theory. But then what happens is that in this critical heavy weight, a lot of the narrative gets lost. Why the narrative is important is I'll talk about, and I'll continue to talk about it. But narrative is somewhere getting dismissed, disappearing. So what happens here is that there is heavy theorization. One problem with the theorization is that it tries to flatten, it tries to universalize. Mishra talks about that when he tries to theorize the diasporic imaginary, that, Indian, the long diaspora of India as a colonial state, as a colony, and then as a post-colonial nation state, we even in that context, even in the context of one nation, we cannot have one universal theory. We cannot have one theoretical model or a theoretical framework which will effectively address all the concerns which the coolies in the British Empire and which the IT workers and which the blue-collar Gulf workers in Gulf, they have. So their concerns cannot be addressed, their issues cannot be addressed with one theoretical model. So the problem, and that is where I'm not denying the value of theory in support of empirical detail. But then, what I'm trying to argue here is that universality of the theory, the flattening which the theorization, over-theorization tries to do. Sudesh Mishra, in the context of Indian diaspora, uses a concept again, what he calls the diaspoetics. So somewhere, and I'll come back to it a little later about the poetics part of it. But this is how it is. R. Radhakrishnan, a very famous theorist, a scholar of Indian origin, so he, in an essay, tries to talk about, where he tries to articulate some of he uses the word anxieties. I prefer a word called concern. Anxiety goes a little further. But, so some of the anxieties, as Radhakrishnan puts it, is that, the diaspora is in danger. Diaspora means the diaspora studies here is in certain kind of a danger of becoming, very virtual theoretical consciousness. You pay attention to this word called virtual. He says the diaspora is in a stage or getting towards becoming a virtual theoretical consciousness, which is in certain ways is completely devoid of the historical references and relationship to the material realities. That is also my concern. That, somewhere in this heavy theorization, we are missing the historical realities. Historical realities are also important not because I'm a student of history and I'm selling my discipline, but also because once we talk about historical realities, then we become aware of the differences. Then we become aware of the difference between a blue-collared Indian in Dubai and CEO of Microsoft in United States, and someone becoming president or prime minister in Trinidad from the same diaspora. If you think in terms of nation, from the same national, inheritance. So unless we are aware of and unless we are careful about the historical reality, we miss this, in this tilt towards the theory. What I'm trying to do here is then, as a kind of a general point, trying to argue and trying to put forth as part of the larger methodological package or methodological structure which we try to employ in the diaspora studies is to be very careful. We engage with the theory. It's very attractive to theorize, but it's very tempting also to theorize. A lot of us are very ambitious that towards the end of my career, at least I put one work which is heavy on theory, which will be often being quoted. Like everyone quotes Bhabha, like everyone quotes Derrida. We all get into that league. But then the problem is that, that's fine. I'm not denying that charm. I myself, if you look at as a middle-aged scholar, I aspire to do somewhere in my career But then, this heavy theory should be complemented by and should be based on the historical realities, which should be based on the specificities which the history provides, which only history can provide. So what we have to then do is to bring together, to kind of put together a very interesting breading, a very interesting weaving of your theory with the unique case studies, your theory with the historical realities, your theory with the empirical. I'm not empiricist, but bread the theory with the empirical data. That is where the big data helps. That is where we cannot dismiss the big data at all for being big data. So bread together this kind of an thing. So the very foundation, the very basic of it is to recognize the value of theory, but also recognize the value of data and put it together. I'm not making a very original argument. I'm just trying to make a case. I'm trying to, put my vote in favor of a dominant understanding that we should not get lost into this virtual theoretical consciousness, virtual, thing. So what we have to do then is that, we have to move then towards a more methodological part. Once we recognize the two important components, then we move to the methodological part. The methodological part then becomes what we have is then how do we capture the different perspectives? Also what makes diaspora studies a little different from the migration studies is that we in diaspora studies we include more human experiences. We start talking about the lived experiences of the people. And once we talk about the human beings, then we cannot bring that objective framework. You may notice that I'm trying to, counter some of my earlier arguments. When I was talking about the data, I was sounding more like a positivist. But then I'm not talking about that universal positivist, because diaspora per se is very unique. It's very subjective. So when we are talking about that subjectivity in the narrative, then we have to look for, we have to go beyond the tables. We have to go beyond that big data. Again, let me clarify that I'm adding to that. Big data is important, but then something more. We have to add a lot of things to the big data which we have. And that big data, once we start looking for more, additions to the big data, then what we have, so we try to look for the alternative sources. Also, the alternative sources are very important because suppose I'm talking about the, Indian indentured laborers who went to Mauritius and Caribbean and Pacific and South America. So there is a lot of big data on that produced by the colonial administrators. But they give you just one perspective. They just talk about, how many people went, what they did, how their life was, they were penalized. Sarah, very cute baby, say hi from me. So an amazing kind of an, documentation, very valuable documentation, but it doesn't say much about the lives of the immigrants or what they thought of, how they renegotiated. So then we have to look for alternative sources. Unfortunately, a lot of those people were not very literate. So they could not write memoirs like today. They could not write their autobiographies like today. But then somewhere they wrote petitions, somewhere they wrote letters, somewhere a lot of other things. So we are looking at alternatives to add to the big data. One very important is the literature, and also I'm trying to I heard in the earlier, I could not hear all, but this thing called interdisciplinarity. Interdisciplinarity is very much rooted on your use of interdisciplinary or different disciplinary methods, but also different disciplinary sources. A lot of us as a student of history are very dismissive of literature. But then once you try to bring this kind of an interdisciplinary study, then you have to be sensitive about. So now what we have is an amazing book which has come from Britain by some of the colleagues who study the old diaspora. A particular one is Tina Ramnarine, a musicologist, but there are others, poets, David Davidine at Warwick, who runs the Caribbean Studies. We mark your memory. So this is about the literature, the poem, the stories, the fiction, the more biographical kind of notes about their descendants, the people who went from India to Mauritius and how they struggled. Great granddaughter, a book I think some of you might be familiar with by Goitra Bahadur called Coolie Women. She talks about her great grandmother who went from India to Caribbean as a coolie women. So to capture that perspective of the diaspora, from the perspectives of the diaspora, we have to look at some of these alternative sources. We have to look at Jhumpa Lahiri, something she writes about in the novel called Namesake. Namesake one cannot dismiss just as a creative fiction. Namesake is more like an autobiographical narrative. So these are the things which we have to look at. And also, very recent is something called visuals. There's a painter who portrays the immigrant experience in a very creative way. We look at, I'm not very good at it, but the blogs, the Facebook posts, the many other things, so all are becoming important, so we have to add to our sources, the conventional sources, what we thought of as collecting data, making an amazing Excel sheet, and getting into archives, get some reports, and then come and contextualize them and analyze them. We have to move beyond that, and I'm very uncomfortable saying that, but I have to say this, because my PhD was that. Making huge Excel sheets and getting into the colonial archives in London and in Mauritius and in Suva in Fiji and National Archives in Delhi. But then, when today, after 12 years of my PhD, I'm looking at, I have to go back to, and I have to add those sources in order to make my diaspora studies more inclusive, in order to make my diaspora studies address some of the concerns which the colonial archives doesn't address, which my large Excel sheets don't address, So sources. Now the final part of it is about the missing things. That is also where we have to look at the missing aspects. And for that, then we have to add to our existing methodologies. The missing links are multiple. I cannot go to all. But there are some of the missing links which we have to look at, particularly in the context of diaspora, which we look at. The first is the invisibles. The first is the subalterns. I have a research student at Hyderabad University. She wanted to work on the subaltern diaspora in New York, as part of the Indian diaspora in the United States. The subaltern, and that includes the taxi drivers, that includes the people who work as chefs in the Indian restaurants, who work as waiters in the Indian restaurants. If you look at particularly the diaspora studies these days, and I'm very interested in that. A couple of years back, I also had a project from Werner Grain from US and from France to study the culinary culture, to look at who we are, what we eat, those kind of arguments. There's a lot of studies of what the diaspora eats, and we try to critically analyze that. We bring a lot of interesting theories around that. But once you go a little deeper in that, and that is what I found it in my research, is that, we talk about restaurants, we talk about these fancy clients. Some of you who are from UK might remember, Veeraswamy, a restaurant in London. So we talk about those people who eat. We talk about the people who own. We talk about the larger cultural logic, or what Arjun Appadurai says, the cultural economy. So we look at the cultural economy of the food of Indian diaspora, but in all those studies, what we don't look at, who are the people who are cooking in the kitchen? Who are the chefs? Okay, so we talk about Indian diaspora in UK. We are moving beyond. We are becoming inclusive. We are including now what they are eating. We are including what they are wearing. But then we are missing a very important part of that diasporic community, that who are the ones who are actually bringing it to your plate, from kitchen to the plate, and in the kitchen from raw to the cooked. So similarly, if you go to New York, and accept that amazing work by Vivek Bald, who is at MIT, called the Bengal Harlem. That's a long history of the Harlem in New York. And a young colleague, my contemporary, Amina Muhammad Arif in Paris, who has a book on the taxiwalas in New York. Where do we have research on them? Everyone talks about the IT professionals in New Jersey and, Silicon Valley and Sandhurst, and the corporates sitting in East Coast of the US to Chicago. What about some of these people who are invisible, who are very visible? Mind you, the taxi drivers are very visible. All the probability that you get down at New York airport, JFK, and you come out and you get a taxi, and the taxiwala is a South Asian. So they are very visible in certain way, but they are very invisible because there is very little writing on them. There is very little research engagement on them. So that is one component in the diaspora studies which we have to look at. And I want to make an case that the existing methodologies will not be, and existing sources will not be able to capture them, will not be able to address their concerns. So to study that invisible, we have to look at, and we have to find new sources. And because there is no report in the New York City which talks about these people. A lot of them are what is called undocumented. They are not in the official archives. They are not so literate and so good in articulating that they will be writing like Jhumpa Lahiri and some Chakravarti and some Singh. So one invisible. The second invisible thing, and I'm very glad that is picking up, and also in the earlier session someone raised a question, is the generational aspect. So far we study the diasporas, which are the movements. The people who went from India, get a job in Microsoft, moves to the United States, how he negotiates, how she negotiates. But then the process started in 1960s, mind you, 1965 when it was allowed. Since then, 3 generations, at least 2 very grown-up generations have come up. So their concerns are different. Again, there is a lot of work picking up. The generational aspect is picking up. We have new books and new researches which talk about generation, but I still feel that it is underrepresented. It's underdocumented. So what about their concerns? Again, our existing methodology to study the first generation diaspora, the migrant, the people who cross the borders, the border crossing, is very different from the people who were born across the border. Their idea of homeland and the idea of homeland of an IIT graduate who joins Silicon Valley, the idea of homeland is very different. The idea of belonging is very different. The dilemmas are different. The conflicts are different. So, and also within the family, a young mother wants her daughter to learn Bharatnatyam because that is what she thinks will make her Indian, will bring her to roots. But she wants to learn salsa. So that kind of, I'm putting a very cliche, very beaten questions, but just to make it simple. I'm aware of the complexities here. So that's salsa. So that kind of a, dilemmas. Our existing methodologies and our existing sources are not competent, are not, will not enable us to understand these concepts. So we need to look at new sources. We need to look at new methodologies. The third one, which again I would say there is a lot of literature on this. There is a lot of inclusion of that, but is the women in diaspora. Some of you may not agree, but the kind of women in diaspora, not as part of the diaspora, but what we can call as a radical feminist methodological perspective, where we look at women as women, not women as part of the diaspora, which has been often constructed as male. Mind you, most of the migrant movements, most of the mobilities in the world have been studied and termed as a very masculine migrations, like Indian indentured laborers. It was the male who migrated during the colonial times. The women went to Mauritius and Fiji and South Africa because there was a legislative requirement to put 40 women with 100 men to satisfy that Victorian morality of sexuality and relationship. So men don't become homosexual, so you have to provide 40 women there. Not that, more than that. There's a lot more, but I don't know, Shuza, should I wrap up now, or should I have?
Yes,
do
sir.
I have a few more? Huh?
Sir, you can conclude, sir.
Okay, just a couple of minutes now. Is that all right?
Please, sir. Yeah.
Great. So what we have to do here is we look at the women as women, bringing in more, and here I'm not talking about inclusion. You see, often what we do is, and that is where the trick is, and that is where the crucial point is, that once we start, okay, so there is a gap. We haven't studied women. So what we do, we propose to include them in the narrative. You see, I hope, I'm clear enough that all of you understand this, that there is a dominant narrative and we are including someone in that. And there is an independent narrative of the women. There is a difference between the two, that there is an existing narrative and you add something, okay? There are 80 men, you add 20 women into your narrative. And you start, and you feel, and you argue that you have included women. Your research addresses the feminist concerns. But then there is another narrative which I'm trying to argue for, which is based on more feminist methodological, one can say also a little more radical too, is a narrative of women, a narrative which is not adding up, a narrative which is independent of. That kind of a narrative is what somewhere we have to look at. What we have to do here is listening in detail of the women, listening the detail of a young daughter, who doesn't want to learn Bharatnatyam, but who wants to learn salsa. So listening the detail of that from her perspective, not as part of a family perspective, not as a part of generational dialectic and generational conversation and a generational conflict, but an independent concern, not just about inclusion, but independence, not just about what, but also how, so that foundational significance of gender is what somewhere we have to talk about. Thank you. There is a lot more, but I think I have spoken a lot. Thank you for your patience. Thank you, Suja, for your invite again. If you have some concerns, questions, I know I was very incoherent, unclear, but I hope you made some sense of it. And I look forward to your comments and questions. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. You can turn on your video. We will have some couple of questions if anyone has. Any question, please?
I think everyone is tired, looking towards the lunch. But it's all right. Shuza, I hope in your brochure you have circulated my mail also. So if there are some concerns, people can write to me later as well. Yeah.
Sir, it was really a wonderful and insightful session. And I'm really very happy after a long time I listened to you. I also listen Rajan sir after a long time.
Yeah.
I feel that I am in your class in University of Hyderabad. It's really wonderful. If there are no questions, can we? Yeah, Kamal Mitra has raised a question. You can ask questions. Kamal, go ahead,
yeah,
please.
Hello. Am I audible?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Hello. I'm a student, and I have just started with reading about diasporic studies. And one thing that quite intrigues me is that how much are we interested, or how much are we talking about the case of African diaspora in India? So this is a question which goes for everyone in the panel.
Yes. Shuza, should I take it now, or should I wait for something more?
I'll check it, sir. I think you can respond to Kamal, sir.
Okay. Yes, that's very interesting, and that is where some of the things I've tried to address by raising the issue of nation. We try to, but if you look at globalization and a lot of the root, I mean, your question somewhere gets connected to our larger understanding of the global world we are. We look at flows which are in certain direction, from the large consumption economies, which had huge population, which has a skill set, to the large producing economies like United States, which has opportunities. And in that framework, we look at migration from, say, India to US, to Canada. We look at migration from Africa to Canada and Africa to US.
We have one more question from Muhammad Farhad from Turkey. You can unmute Muhammad and ask the question. Muhammad Farhad.
Okay, sir. This is Muhammad Farhad from Egypt, not Turkey. Okay, my question is in the context of the methods and approaches to study the diaspora and immigration. From this session days, I will speak about the refugees and the migrants, but I would like to ask about what's the situation of the statelessness person. Because you know that the reason of statelessness is different rather than the reasons of refugees or migrants. So, if the approach is and methodology is valid to also apply on the statelessness studies or not? Thank you.
Sorry, I missed it.
Could you repeat it again?
Yeah, sorry. May I request you to please repeat it again? Sorry to bother.
May I ask a question?
Yeah, please.
Sir, as you said about generational conflict, in the books of Chitra Banerjee, I found physicists like kleptomania, dream telling, interpreting. In that, I found few diseases which mother had in other symptom, and it is followed up by daughter. How I can see this as is this a generational conflict, or it is raised only due to their immigrant, they have pressured their mind in some other country? Can I take it as a generational conflict because I'm pursuing my PhD related to this?
Yes, but why do you want to just find one answer? There could be multiple answers. It could be a generational aspect, but it could also be because both of them have this pressure of displacement, alienation. So I would suggest that don't look at either or. Sorry, don't mind. I hope you don't take it otherwise. I'm talking as the problem with teachers are that they treat rest of everyone as their student. So with that, I would suggest you that don't look for one simple answer. That whether it is a generational thing or whether it is because of the migration experience, it can be both. And how will you address the generational aspect if you don't recognize the fact that this generational aspect is emerging out of migration experience? Both are very linked to each other. So look for a little, more many answers to your question is what I suggest.
Thank you, sir.
May I request Muhammad Farhad to repeat his question, please?
Okay, my question is about session today is focused in migrants and refugees and the reasons behind the migration and the refugees is different. And my question is focused on what about the situation of stateless person? If about the approaches and methodologies applying studying the Diaspora is also valid to apply in studying the situation of stateless person or not? Taking into consideration that the reasons behind the stateless is also somehow different from the reasons behind migrants and refugees. That's it. Thank you.
Could you hear it clearly? And there's some problem in my mic, my speakers.
Yeah, tell me, sir. Yeah.
Could you repeat it for me? I couldn't hear you it again, and I don't want to embarrass. I'm very embarrassed. I couldn't hear you. Can you just repeat it for me, Suza? If you got it.
Yes, sir. It's not clear. I think the voice.
Okay, so I can repeat the question in short form. That the question is.
Could you please hold your mic a bit away from your mouth so that we could be able to listen?
Or I request Mr. Mohammed can also write possible.
Yeah, I think that's better if you just write it. Sorry.
So I could repeat the question?
Yeah, please. Can you?
The question is my question is about the statelessness person. The stateless person, because the methodology and approaches we discussed today is focused on migrants and refugees. My question: does this approach and methodology it could be applied on studying the situation of stateless, because the reason behind the stateless is different from refugees and migrants. This is my question.
Yes, I got it now. Yes. Can you come?
Sir, if I'm not wrong, I think he is trying to ask, can the methodology that we discuss will be applied to refugees? You can take over, sir. Yeah, please.
Now it was clear. I also heard it. So let me come. Okay. Thank you. This is a very, what you have asked is the biggest challenge we face. And diaspora scholars and diaspora studies is a very safe. It tries to play very safe. It doesn't get involved in these kind of very uncomfortable, very challenging questions. But one thing which I want to submit, and that is where I was also talking in the beginning, is that no methodology comes to a finality. No argument, no theoretical framework is ever final in its thing. It's all evolving. So far, the way diaspora studies has evolved and the methodologies which we have, and some of it which I was arguing, are not capable of addressing the issue of refugee. Diaspora is a very, what should I say? We all are very, lazy people. We try to address very comfortable questions. In case of refugees, one thing which makes it very different and very challenging is the idea of nation state, the idea of home and the idea of host. We don't, diaspora is looked at as voluntary migration. People who moved are even if there are some push questions, largely the diaspora is about people crossing the borders legally, people crossing the borders through a visa regime, But in case of refugees, why the methodologies are not competent enough to address is that a lot of tasks, what we look at as refugee, they move without these documents. They seek asylum. They don't seek residence. They don't seek permanent residence. They don't seek a visa regime. They come as, they seek permit to enter. They seek asylum, which is very different from seeking H-1B visa. Okay. The second is the rule of the native, the rule of the place of origin. In diaspora studies, most of the pieces, the home is too happy to send them abroad. If you go to Kerala, everyone, including the state, wants them to go to Dubai, because that is where Professor Rajan brought in very passionately that the state needs it. 1/3 of the income of the state is coming from the migrant, But in refugee case, there is a different kind of persecution. They run away from that state, because they are not comfortable in that state for more than economic reasons. A lot of people go from Kerala or Bihar to Dubai because they're economically uncomfortable. They want to brighten their opportunities. But in case of refugees, the discomfort and discontent comes more from the political reasons, less economic reasons. They're politically persecuted. They minority, those kind of power plays come into play. So my methodology is not competent to handle this. The third is the place where we go. In case of diaspora, because we are going as on a legal work permit, and we are going to make contributions in that economy and that larger diversity program like Singapore, or you hear about the, even in United States, the diversity program. We are going to add to that diversity program. We are welcomed. There might be ethnic crisis. There might be some Indian anti-immigrant sentiments, but largely the state welcomes them. The people welcome them. The economy welcomes them. The statist cultural setup welcomes them, because somewhere they have to prove that they are multicultural. So they have to bring different races into it. But in case of refugee, they are being looked as burden. We look at them as someone who is coming to exploit, someone who is coming to be a burden on the nation, its resources, its people. So they are not welcome. Because of political correctness, because of certain UNHRC regulations, we cannot throw them out, but we don't really include them. We don't really welcome them. So that is again where the diaspora studies is very limited in addressing these concerns. I hope I could answer some of your concerns.
Thank you, sir. We have two more. We'll have two more questions. Then we will conclude it. May I request Neha Singh, our student, to ask her question?
Yeah, thank you, sir. Sir, as you pointed out, historical narratives proceed from empirically validated facts or events, and they necessarily require imaginative steps to place them in a coherent story. So they represent only a selection of historical events. Thus, this truth is very limited. So I just want to know, how can we reinterpret the historical past? Means whatever the historical data or archival data is there, so how can we reinterpret those data or the historical past?
Yes. Sorry, I missed your name. It's not showing the participants. Who is this?
Neha Singh.
Yes, Neha. You took me to my research methodology class as a student of history. So you see, that is the big, theoretical debate from where we start from. Because the facts, and that is one of the biggest arguments against the objective history. Objective history, the positivism talks about representation of fact as they are. Okay. But the problem is that how many facts? I can go to 3 archives. So I have 3 sets of documents, which tells me one story. But then once I went to London, I got 5 other documents which give me another side of the story. So there is no positive or objective reality. We have to depend on something called subjectivity, selection of sources. So that is one basic thing to keep in mind. Also, the thing is that nobody, long ago, there was a dominant trend in history writing where people were talking about total history. That, okay, from India to US, Indian diaspora in US, I will write the total history. But nobody can write the total history, because today I'm writing a total history on the basis of 100 documents. Tomorrow, suddenly a new archives comes up, which brings 100 more sources. So my total history now is not a total history anymore, So never ever now people claim to write the total history or complete history. Everyone talks about a subjective, selective narrative.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
We have last question from Anagiota Taraka. She is from Greece, PhD scholar. May I request Taraka to ask her question?
Good morning from Greece. We're talking about the diaspora people, and we said that we should hear the voices and incorporate them in the diaspora studies. I would like to ask, how can they be heard? What is the role of the interpreters here? Who are they? Are they diaspora people themselves or migrants? And how can they contribute to this question? Can they be impartial, or they mix their own history, their own feelings? Can be neutral and objective. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. It's good afternoon for us. So I say good afternoon. Good morning as well. There are 2 things, and it is linked very much to the earlier question, is that are we trying to write the objective history? Are we trying to write a narrative which is objective? Objectivity came out of scientific revolution. It's a product of modernity, against which postmodernism talked a lot about. That what is true for you might not be true for me. So somewhere in our narrative, we have to give that space. And precisely to capture that subjectivity, I wanted to include, to hear them. Because so far what is happening is that we hear from the official narrative, which is one narrative, which might be true for if you are looking at it from official perspective, or that bureaucratic, or from that administrative perspective, or from the nation state perspective. But then how the migrant, how the diaspora felt. Now, however, I'm not arguing to write a random, history. That becomes fiction then. I'm not saying that you totally then go switch from this official narrative, one kind of narrative to the other kind of narrative. What I'm trying to argue is to combine, to collect as many voices one can do. And that is what then I would go back to, though Marc Bloch is not very fashionable, a historian from France called Marc Bloch, who wrote about the Mediterranean, who wrote about the medieval times, feudalism, but he also wrote about how history should be written, where he talked about the historian's craft. So I'm not just saying historian's craft, but all of us, our craft, the methodological craft, or our methodology is that then try to corroborate, one set of information is coming from one and another set of information is coming from another, the third set of information coming from somewhere else. And we make a judgment. That is where we come into the picture as a critical scholar, that we bring our critical abilities, critical analytical abilities, and our understanding, our perspectives on the larger situation to try to portray, to try to put forth a narrative. So it's not about judging what is true and false, but it is trying to make it as much inclusive as one can be. So I think that is what I have to say. I don't know. That's all.
Thank you so much, sir. Yeah. May I now request, I know there are a couple of questions again, but due to this time constraint, with the due permission of our other speakers here, Vinod sir is here, and Anis sir is here, and many other distinguished speakers are here. Keeping the respect of time, I think we should wind up. Now may I request Dr. Sayantan Mandal to give vote of thanks to our speakers. Over to Mandal.
Sure. Am I audible, Shuja?
Yeah, please.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Amit Mishra, sir. It's a pleasure to listen to you after a long time. And it's been...
video, please?
Yeah, is it better now?
Yeah, video. Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you, sir, for such a wonderfully structured talk that you have given, starting with this call for relooking, revisiting the materials that we come across in archives. The way you structured your talk through the, looking into the historical realities to understand the different material differences within the class that migrates, and with the focus that you in the middle that you have spent the time and talking about the uniqueness of the case studies, that every case study that adds to the uniqueness of the research, bringing in the subjective framework. It was wonderful. And talking about alternative sources, as you talked about petition, letters, novels, I was reminded of that as a student of literature department, how our own researchers within the literature departments have taken a leaf out of diaspora's concern over Girmetias, Jahaji musics, and the authors like M.G. Vasanji, who has opened up a new chapter for research within literature department, and it came from diaspora studies. And so thank you so much, sir, for such a wonderfully structured talk. And we can see that there are so many questions. As we are almost concluding it, we still have questions coming. So thank you once again, sir, on behalf of CDS, Central University, Gujarat, for this wonderful talk.
Thank you, Sayantan. It's also so nice to be invited by one of the students from my previous workplace. So, I have followed his trajectory as a student and then as a colleague, and also coming the vote of thanks coming from I know I think I'm humbled by your appreciation of my talk, but I also feel it's a little prejudiced because somewhere we know each other. So somewhere, I used to interact with you as a student. So but anyway, thank you, Santan, for your appreciation, very generous words. But again, thank you to Shahzaudin and Central University of Gujarat and colleagues there. I've been there once for a conference, so all the colleagues, and many of them have been from my alma mater, JNU. So I'm thankful to your co-host, Shahzaudin, and I hope I sincerely hope that, the last 1 hour or so, I could make. With that note, I send my gratitude. I'm very humbled. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir.
It was nice interacting with you all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much, chairs. I'm sorry for intervening at the last moment and taking the chair's position, but thankfully we were able to reach and complete successfully today's sessions. I have a small announcement for all of you. The link that we have sent is valid for 3 days. You can use same link to join all sessions, all participants. And I saw many mails coming in between regarding the link. But as I said, you can use same link, and you can also help your co-participant to join the session. With this, I once again thank you all speakers here, our Amit sir, Rajan sir, and of course Binod Kadriya sir is here. We have Anisur Rahman sir, my colleagues, my dear students from Center for Diaspora Studies, and participants from different parts of the world who joined in Microsoft team as well as in Facebook. Yes, there were some technical issues in the morning, but thankfully we are able to sort out those. And regarding this chat box, we could not open in the Microsoft team because if we open the chat box, the moment someone enters question, that creates some noise and that hampers our audio recording. Due to that reason, we could not open the our chat box. Thank you once again, everyone, for joining this. With due permission from Professor Binod sir and Ani sir, should we close today's session? We'll join tomorrow again at 9:45. If anyone wants to say anything for or express their views, you are most welcome. For 5 minutes, then we'll close it, please. Anyone wants to say anything? Any comment or suggestion, please? Yes, Latifa. Thank you.
Hi. Thank you for all of this. I'm sorry I missed the first part because I thought it will be the UK timing. So when I joined, I think I missed a few hours. So when was it said that is the Indian timing? I missed this. Was it on the email or?
Don't worry, we will have recording of all sessions, and those sessions early morning which you couldn't attend, you can watch them. They are available on our Facebook page. We will also circulate the recordings very soon.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
It was very interesting. Thank you.
Hope all of you will join in time tomorrow. And I'm sorry for time difference that we have between India and Canada and Europe and other places.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
So now I would formally conclude the session with deep of my heart. From the depth of my heart, I thank you all for joining today's sessions, and I also thank our technical team who is constantly supporting us, helping us fixing the technical issues. Thank you, Jayesh Bhai, Rajesh Bhai, Mayur Bhai, and other your team members. I hope we'll not have any problem tomorrow since you have already worked on it. So let us conclude here. Thank you once again for joining. Have a good day, and please join tomorrow early morning at least 9:45 according to Indian Standard Timing. Thank you so much all. Take care. Have a good day. Rajesh bhai. You